This video will show you how to replace the power steering rack bellows boot on a Cadillac CTS. This will be located behind your front wheel. Let's get into it. Let's get ready to remove our front wheel. To do that, the first thing we have to do is safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. Once you've done that, you're going to remove all 5 of your 19mm lug nuts so we can get the wheel off of here. Now that we have the wheel out of place, let's focus on our tie rod ends. Looking in between the inner and the outer, you can see that we have a 22mm jam nut. You can also use some long pliers for this. Now when we go to loosen this, you're going to be turning it clockwise. There we are. Now that I have it broken free from the outer tie rod end, let's make our way towards the outer portion of the outer tie rod end where it connects to our steering knuckle. We'll be using a 19mm for our mounting nut. After a quick inspection, let's just start that back on a couple threads. Now we need to separate the outer tie rod end from the knuckle. If you have a tie rod end puller, you can use that. If you have a hammer, you could tap on the steering knuckle, and this should want to break free. I'm going to use some penetrant and tap on this with a hammer. Now we can turn this outer tie rod end counterclockwise. As we start unscrewing it from the inner tie rod end, count the amount of turns it takes to remove it. 1, 2, and so on. There it is, friend. A quick inspection will set this aside. Now we can start fully removing that jam nut from the inner tie rod end. To do that, you're going to want to hold on to the inner tie rod end. I'm going to use some locking pliers. We'll use our 22mm to remove that nut. Now as we start looking at the bellows boot, we want to carefully remove the clamp. Now this clamp is actually in poor condition, but typically they would have 3 ears. You would squeeze them together and pull it out of place. This one I'm just going to go ahead and take right off of here and dispose of it properly. While we're in this area, let's just make sure that the boot does break free from the inner tie rod end. Now let's make our way to the inboard side. As far as the inboard clamp, we're going to have to break this out of place. So with that said, I'm using a pry bar and a hammer. I'm just going to try to grab onto the small ear. Now this small ear can be in different areas depending on your application. Ours is right up along the top. I'm resting my pry bar against it. Now I'm going to tap on the other end of the pry bar to break this free. I can remove that clamp. At this point, let's take hold of the power steering rack bellows boot. We'll give it a twist and break it free from the power steering rack on the inboard side there. Slide that out of there. There it is, friend. Okay, let's get ready to install the brand new power steering rack bellows boot. When we install this bellows boot, we're sliding it over the inner tie rod end. We need to bring the larger diameter area all the way down to the power steering rack. Now once you feel as though you have it on the power steering rack, you need to double check. It needs to have a good seal. Speaking of a seal, we need to install a clamp. I'm going to be using a wire tie. Now when I go to install my wire tie, I find it to be easiest if I make a large circle. I'm just going to go 1 click on my wire tie so it does not come apart. Now I can slide it over the entire bellows boot all the way down towards the power steering rack. Once I have it in place, we'll make sure it's nice and tight and trim off any excess. I typically use long nose pliers to tighten this, and I'll use some cutters to trim off the excess. We'll dispose of that properly. With that installed, let's make sure it's nice and tight. That should not move around off of the power steering rack. Now we can make our way to the outer clamp portion. Same process here. I have my wire tie. We'll slide it over the inner tie rod end, down towards where it needs to be. Continuing on, we're going to apply some anti-seize on the threaded area of the inner tie rod end, approximately where the jam nut would be. Now let's install that jam nut. We're going to take this and bring it approximately halfway up the threaded portion of the inner tie rod end. Let's apply some anti-seize along this portion of the inner tie rod end. Now let's get ready to install our outer tie rod end. So now as we start installing the outer tie rod end, we want to make sure we bring it in the same amount of turns as it took to remove it in the first place. My application was 16 turns. Your application may vary. That was 1, 2, and so on. When we stop, let's stop with this facing straight up and down. Now let's get the outer tie rod in place. Just bring that over towards the knuckle. We have our mounting nut on top there. Once you have that started on, go ahead and snug it up and then torque that to 52 foot-pounds. Got my torque wrench. Let's make our way back to the jam nut. As far as that jam nut, let's make sure we turn it all the way up against that outer tie rod end. We're turning it counterclockwise. We'll make sure we bottom it out. Make sure it's nice and snug. There we are. One last quick inspection in this area, and we can prepare to reinstall our front wheel. With that in place, we'll continue on to all 5 of our 19mm lug nuts. We'll start them on, get the wheel back on the ground, torque each of them to 100 foot-pounds in a crisscross manner. I've got the wheel back on the ground. Let's go ahead and torque these lug nuts to that 100 foot-pounds. Torqued. Okay, friend, we finished our installation. The next thing we have to do is take the vehicle for a road test down to our local alignment shop. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.